Right, amongst my parts I've got the choice of two, and one is very ugly and one is slightly less ugly, so I think we'll declare the slightly less ugly one to be the winner. I have to centre it up with that hole visible in the arm there, the release lever, and screw it in. That's it, it's in. Now it just needs to be tightened up. And that just moves this catch here, which allows the front to spring open. That's very good. Right, so that body is ready to be put aside while I clean up my componentry, ready for assembling the camera. And that was me again testing the bellows when I shouldn't have been. And I will start, typically I start with the focus method components and the bellows struts, and then I move on from there. Now this focus mount here, that's filled with dried out terrible looking grease. That's all going to have to be cleaned out. Likewise its mates here, the inner and outer helical and the retainer ring here, they're all covered in very nasty grease. The bellows struts are quite stiff to open. Looking at these, see what sort of state they're in. There's a little bit of surface corrosion. It's quite minor, it won't cause us any issue. A little bit more corrosion here, but of course that's tucked right back in the body where no one will ever see it. Bit sticky in the release, again that will be dried out grease causing that. But it looks to be quite sound, and certainly it's not bent up out of shape in any major way. So that'll be my first task, is to clean that. And our focus scale ring. Now the problem with this is that it was distorted, it was pulled up out over one of the screw heads that holds it down. And you can see where there's a notch just here where that screw head pulled through. And I'm going to see now, I'm going to use a tip of a screwdriver to see if that edge has been rolled back, and it has, which means I can roll it back into position. And potentially the screw could hold that down again. So we no longer have a notch here, we just have a weak edge of the metal. That'll be fine. I'm just checking that none of its mates had pulled through, and they haven't. That one's a bit distorted. That'll be fine. So once the focus helical is cleaned and lubricated and correctly assembled, there should be no problem with this focus scale ring moving correctly and smoothly, and certainly won't be sitting on there cockeyed like it was before. So I can start with my bellows struts. So I'm using naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, on a cotton bud or a Q-tip, and I'm just cleaning all these surfaces to remove any dirt, grease. You can see the sort of dirt that comes off. Particularly dried out grease and the freight of dust and grit that it tends to hold in place. I don't clean these struts in the ultrasonic cleaner because paint and engraved markings like that tends to be lifted out quite nicely in the cleaner, and then you've got to reinstate them. So, and this is a especially good reason to do it. These just get cleaned by hand. These two arms here, they lock the struts to stop you folding the struts, except when the focus scale has been turned back to the infinity position. Or at least that's the intention. Of course, if you're ham-fisted enough and you press hard enough, you can make things move. When these cameras were current, people treated cameras as a delicate instrument and didn't force things, treated it with respect. We've come to expect that things will be bulletproof, and as a result sometimes people these days are a little bit too enthusiastic when they are using things, and when a component doesn't want to move, they'll do useful things like push it a little bit harder until it does move, which almost inevitably ends with things broken, rude words said, and the item needing major repair. Just checking that when the bellows are in the fully open position and they're clicked into place, that there's no undue play. If the bellows have had a good hiding, you can sometimes end up with a situation where this slot here has effectively been distorted so that it's slightly open, in which case it doesn't grip the rivet, the post that runs through there, and there's some rattle in the struts. There's no rattle with these struts, they're working nicely. It's something you have to be aware of. It'll drive you crazy if you've got play in the struts and you're trying to set the rangefinder up, and you'll get the images coinciding correctly, and next time you open the front of the camera up they're not coinciding correctly, and take some tracking down to figure out why, and it'll be because there's play in the struts, and as a result the front standard is not sitting in exactly the same plane each time. That's all good, and I will just wipe a bit of molybdenum on the release at this point. So that that'll run smoothly. Get that sitting correctly. That's good. Make sure I get that little bit of grime out of there. That looks good. So, I'll lubricate up the slots at the rear of the struts before I put them back in the body. I don't lubricate the front slots at that time, because I'll only end up with the grease all over my fingers instead of where it should be if I do it at this time. So they're ready to go back in the body. I'll check its components that we need for that purpose. We should have 4 screws. That's one of them, that's from the base. We should have 2 from the film cassette well. I'm just checking that I haven't got anything here that should be that. No, it should be that pair. I'm just checking that I've got the right ones and sitting there. That's good. Start with the body, and I'll put a bit of molybdenum paste on this guide rod here. That's where the shutter release runs. It has a return spring that sits on there. And on the struts, this piece here runs on that rod. So I'll hook that in place. Drop my struts into position. And just holding them loosely in with my hand, I'll open the film cassette well end of open up the back of the camera. We have our 2 screws that held those struts in place. I'll get one in place and I'll turn this around so you can actually see what I'm doing. Just for a change. It's the first one. That's the second one. I've run that screw in, but I haven't tightened it up. We have 2 spacer washers that go in at this point. One at the top between the struts mechanism and the body, and one at the bottom in the same place. And they are fitted where the screw goes through at that point. So, this is the awkward one to put in place because I've got the guide for the rangefinder in the body at that position. So I've got to pull the struts back slightly and see if I can drop that ring into place. I'm trying to see where it is. I can see it, you won't be able to see it, and I'm just trying to tell where it is relative to that hole. I think I'm just off the edge of it. I'll see if I can manoeuvre it down there. Yeah, I'm well away. That's it, I can see it now. Here it is, visible through the hole in the body. So I line it up with the tip of my tweezers. Run that screw loosely through that space. That screw runs through into the struts mechanism. And this spacer sits in the equivalent position at the base of the camera. That's much easier to deal with because I can see what I'm doing. I can pull that into position with the tip of my tweezers, take our single screw. I know this is the right screw because it's quite ugly, the head's somewhat mutilated, got a bit of glue on it and so forth, so I know it came from the bottom of the camera. Now our 4 screws can be done up tight. That's the struts back in the body. And we're ready for the next part. And the next part here will be cleaning and assembling the focus mount. Alright, I'll start cleaning up the focus mount. Just using some naphtha here. Usually I start by cleaning the front surface. There's nothing happening on the front surface, of course, nothing moves there, that's just grease that's squeezed its way out and run there from inside from the outer helical or elsewhere. That grease is coming away quite well. Sometimes it's very hard, has to be almost chipped off. This is dissolving quite well in the naphtha, it's cleaning up quite easily. I'll just get a toothpick and scrape down the back here past the posts. Make sure I lift out any dried grease from there. I'll run it around the inside edges here in case there's any hardened rubbish there. That looks good. Move on to this piece. This is the retainer, and likewise the grease is coming off very easily. The focus on this camera was quite stiff, but it wasn't terrible. Here we have the inner and outer helical. That grease is coming off quite well. You can see from the colour of this that it's not just grease, that's got a lot of dirt that it's gathered up over time. It'll be grit. All of that stuff will be making it stiffer than it should have been. Harder to adjust the focus easily. With the rangefinder camera, because you are making your focus adjustments with the camera held to the eye, it's important that the focus moves smoothly and easily. With a viewfinder camera, the opposite is the case almost. You don't want the focus to be easily disturbed because you have no feedback when you're looking through the viewfinder. So you have the camera away from the eye when you're setting the focus distance, and you need it to stay where you have set it while you have the camera at your eye to compose your photo. So for a rangefinder camera, it's important that the focus be easy and smooth, and for a viewfinder camera that is nowhere near as important, In fact, it's sometimes beneficial that it takes a bit more force to disturb the position of the focus. It's also worth noting that any camera where you have to manually cock the shutter before each exposure, that's also an opportunity for you to accidentally disturb the focus setting or the aperture setting or the shutter speed setting at the same time. So good practice to cock the shutter, then check your settings and then take your photo. Some shutters it's particularly easy to disturb the aperture setting while you're trying to cock the shutter. It seems quite good. Let's check these two components together. Can't seem to get that to start easily. Can't be holding my mouth right. That's better. Oh, it's a little bit stiff feeling. Of course it's quite dry. I'm just working some solvent in here, some naphtha, working it backwards and forwards. That'll loosen up any remaining dried grease, which I can then remove. And my camera is busy telling me that the battery's running flat. So if it suddenly turns off in the middle of a sentence, you'll know what's happened. Otherwise, I'll just continue doing this until it's done. That feels quite good. I've just got to make sure now that I've got my inner and outer correctly aligned relative to each other, and then I can lubricate this and reassemble it. Okay, I've cleaned up the helical and now I want to lubricate it. So I'll back it out most of the way, but not all the way because I've got my alignment correct. Apply a little wipe of helical grease in 5 or 6 places around the inner helical and then work that in. I'm checking the feel of it, make sure it feels nice and smooth. That action's good. I can run some round the outer helical where it sits in the focus mount. Where it runs on the guides, that's where those 2 little holes are at the front. I'll just put a tiny touch in there, and making sure I've got this the correct way round, I'll drop it into the mount. I can check that it moves smoothly. There's an appropriate amount of drag there, nothing horrendous. And our retainer, I can run a tiny wipe around that edge and the retainer will be dropped into place. The retainer is held in by 6 small countersunk head screws. I'll just run a couple of screws in lightly. Check the action, make sure it's smooth. Just do those screws lightly up. It has an appropriate feel to it to me. That should work out well. That was the first 3 screws. Of course we have 6, so I'll find 3 more. I'll nip those screws up. Sometimes when you're working on a focus mount like this, you'll discover that the screws are loose. Sometimes when they're loose it's because they've been left loose on purpose, and typically it means that there's been some problem with the focus mount. Perhaps it's distorted or something, and it will not run smoothly when everything's tightened up correctly. Of course, the correct course of action is to find the problem and fix it, not disguise it by leaving screws loose. But people don't always do the best thing. Right, so I'll just drop that into place. Oops, one of those 2 little arms has become dislodged. That's better. So I have 4 screws that hold the focus mount to the front standard. I'll pull 2 of them into position now. Just done those up loosely. Find it's 2 mates. And run these ones up. They're all in place. I'll tighten those 4 screws. That's good. Check that the focus action is still smooth. That's all good. We have 4 small screws which hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, and they need to be fitted now. Because I've only freshly glued the bellows to the body casting, I won't be pulling the front standard out and pulling the bellows out to their full extent at the moment. It's nearly the end of the day here. That can wait till tomorrow, when the glue has had more than sufficient time to cure. It's good. Our focus scale ring is here, and our focus scale ring, so I'm going to apply a tiny drop of grease to these edges. That's where those locking arms go that prevent you from closing the front of the camera when the focus is not set to infinity. Now, just rotating my outer helical to align the alignment mark I put on the focus scale ring. It's a bit reluctant to go there, not sure why. Let's go back around here a bit. That's better. And you can usually see little marks on your focus scale ring where the heads of the screws previously bit into it, and you can take them as a confirmation that you're in the correct position. So I've got 4 screws, countersunk head screws, to hold this in place. Or I should have. Two seem to have gone into hiding. What's that one? No, it's one of the others. It's one of the others. There's one. And there's another. Right. Where that screw had distorted, where the head had pulled, where the focus scale ring had pulled over the top of the head of the screw over here, I want to make sure that I've got a good screw there so that it doesn't pull out past the head of the screw. These are the same size screws as held the retainer ring on the focus mount, so you can sort out 4 good screws to hold the focus scale ring in place, and you can leave the ugly ones for doing the retainer ring if you like, because they're not critical. Alright, that's good. That's all in place, and that focus moves nice and smoothly, no hesitation, no unnatural stiffness, and it doesn't feel dry either. I'm going to leave that right there now because I don't want to pull the front out and extend the bellows to their full extent because the adhesive hasn't had time to fully harden. That's it for today.